actually went out after that event and also surveyed the flotsam and debris lines around the areas of the harbour, and we built a model to deliver that scenario. And then all what we need to do is then up the size of the storm and put in the predictions on sea level rise, and we can re-predict what the changes are in inundation to our harbour. Okay.
And well, can I just ask you to bring the mic right close?
Sorry, sir.
I'm not hearing you through the microphone or through the speakers. Thanks.
Is this better, sir?
Yep.
So we did this jointly with the Regional Council in Western Bay, the same way we did our erosion work. We engaged NIWA to build the model. As I said, they validated that against our January 2018 event, and it actually performs extremely well. So we know that we have accuracy within the model, and therefore the scenarios we've run. And we run all our model scenarios at mean high water springs. There's no point in considering mean low water springs, because mean high water springs is the thing that matters. Okay? And as I said, we run present day scenarios, and then we predict long-term sea level rise changes. Okay? So coastal storm inundation. So this is only in relation to our inner harbour. We are not doing this yet on our open coast. It's our inner harbour only. And the way in which this works in this diagram is, maybe seems complex, but what we're really saying is that, as you know, the sea rises and falls within the inner harbour every day. Mean high water springs, mean low water springs through the tidal cycles. When we have a high tide, we can actually have a low pressure system come over our city, as we did in January last year. That low pressure system actually allows for the sea to elevate, because it doesn't have the pressure being pushed down on it. And when we have a big storm like a cyclonic event, it is creating significant waves through the wind, and with that additional, it pushes that water up over land. Okay? We know that we experience this. We've experienced this many times before through previous cyclones. But it is obviously the problem when that water overtops outside of the harbour onto land or into buildings. That is when it becomes the natural hazard, the issue that we need to turn our minds to. And the starting point is the education. The key thing of this is, when you get a model, you get that information, the big changes are, and the changes with this study from prior ones, is that as you get bigger storms, you just get bigger winds, which leads to more waves, and then the changes in sea level rise scenarios that are imposed on us through the Regional Council, through the Regional Policy Statement, or the Ministry for the Environment Guidelines. The key thing also with this is that information that we get and shared can affect land and buildings, and interestingly enough, you can actually get a letter from us where you've got water on your property, but you may be actually on top of a hill. And the reason for that is that their title is actually taking the cliff face down to the bottom of the harbour margins or some of Council's reserves. So where they've got water coming over the land. So this isn't just a conversation about those areas of low lying. It is actually, you could be on top, but part of your land that you own from the title. We've got areas like this around Bethlehem, okay? We actually have land ownership at low-lying areas, but actually they own the cliff face and then they have the house on top. So it's one of those interesting situations where people say, well, I live on a hill, but you're telling me I'm subject to the tide. It's actually, we're having a conversation about land in that context, not buildings, okay? So as part of our work and part of this model, we've actually built 18 different model scenarios. Okay, now that's a lot. We're actually in the space now with our technology where we can run multiple scenarios, okay, where previously we would run one. So that means we've become very data rich, but it's extremely difficult to communicate all of those scenarios to the public. So what we've done is we've built a viewer that has all of those scenarios and allows people to investigate the issue of time. So a current time frame, a 50-year time frame, and a 100-year time frame or 110-year time frame. You can consider sea level rise change in its own right from a present day situation up to 1.6 metres. And then you can also investigate, interrogate different storm events, a 50-year, a 100-year, and a 500-year, okay? And we're not here to say which is the right scenario for any one person. We're here to share as much information as we possibly can, because it helps the end user, being the property owner or the property purchaser, the developer, etc., to take that information and think about what the risks are on a specific property. Okay. So as always, numbers matter, and so I've given you a table up here. Now the way in which this table works, which is the same as the presentation we gave you with erosion recently, is at the top we're talking about sea level rise scenarios out to 2130. Okay. Down the left-hand side is the mean high water spring scenarios in terms of the storm events. So the 2% storm is a 50-year return period. We call it the 50-year storm. The 1% is the 100-year storm, and the 0.2% is a 500-year storm. That's a very significant storm, but it's important for us to understand what the consequences of those significant storms are, because we may need to plan for them. The key thing is that the January 2018 event was a 30-year storm. So if you remember that we had areas overtopped in a 30-year storm, that means all of these scenarios are actually greater inundation extents than that. And then the table within it along the top and the below, the 0.4, the 0.6, etc., are the sea level rise scenarios that are mandated on us from the government, okay, that we need to understand. And in there is the number of properties. Now, once again, I'll just reiterate that conversation about you could be on a hill, you could get a letter, because you're in that extent. Also, you are affected if your front driveway is inundated, because it's the property. So it's a big number, and those numbers take into account any property where our model is actually showing inundation extent. Okay. This also in these numbers includes council-owned land, including reserve land. So the number is actually probably greater than what is the affected population, and in this case, the affected population we're trying to communicate with is 5,500 properties. Okay. Currently, there are 2,975 that are already within our flood hazard zone. So if we think about that, we've probably got about a third additional areas, and that is because we've got stronger winds in our model and we've got greater sea level rise scenarios than where we did 10 years ago when we did this exercise.
If we go on, why the blacked out areas?
We don't have modelled scenarios for that. We just didn't run the model for those things. We felt that it wasn't necessary in terms of the data we were doing. Okay, so that's why I blacked them out. And then we do it the same conversation for buildings. So it's a much lesser number, 3,200 buildings that could be affected over all of these scenarios if we go down the 1.25 metre sea level rise with the 500-year event. Okay, so these are big numbers and they're changes from where we are. So the key thing is yesterday, in preemption to this project, letters were sent out to affected landowners around these harbour margins, informing this of the change in information, and they got an FAQ sheet as well. Okay, that goes on the property file, and therefore we end up in the situation, as we have discussed before, we hold natural hazard information, we have to legally share that, and the way in which we do so is we communicate with those landowners, because we hit the conversation under the Local Government Official Information Meeting Act, which is LIMS. And we need to remember that the LIM was created to empower a purchaser in the real estate market to give them the information that could affect the price. Okay, and it's very simple tests. We hold the information, we must share this, and this is not new for us as a council. Okay. And so given those tests, we are sharing this. Now, the way in which we've decided to share this information, which is different from some prior scenarios, is because we have so much information, it's very difficult in an inundation to share 18 different model runs. And rather than send out a map, that would have to be the worst case scenario map. That's not my preference, because you're actually going straight to an end scenario rather than allowing a person to explore the information we hold. Okay? And we need to be always careful about this, because we are not callous in sharing this information. We're doing our best to share it as objective as we possibly can. The other thing is that the information we do hold triggers the application of it under the Building Consents and the Resource Management Act in terms of subdivision, the consideration of this information in regards to risk. And this is a good thing, because what it does is it helps build resilience in our city over time, where we use this information to build above flood levels. So there is obviously a lot of information that goes out. While you might get a letter in FAQ, that lands over, well, from tomorrow onwards, in regards to people getting a letter saying we have new information, new predictions, and this is what the information means. We are directing people to our website to understand the technical reports, the further information, and the inundation extent, and the ability to explore the different data sets within our viewer. We've actually built a specific viewer for this project, as I said, that allows you to consider the ideas of time, sea level rise in its own right, and the combinations of storm surge. Okay, it's not a tool that is out there in the public realm generally, so we've tried to do our best to explain this as best we can. Okay, so we all obviously need to be careful about how we communicate this information, as you'll remember from the erosion project. And the way in which we've done this is that we've set up a team to be able to respond to those affected parties that receive this letter, okay, through the ability to go to our specific web page, the web viewer, and get the information. There is a general statement that goes on the LIM that properties in these areas are subject to coastal hazards. The letter, the FAQ, and a specific map does not go on the LIM because we want to direct people back to our website to use the tools we've built to explore the information rather than us mandate one scenario. Okay. The other thing that we're doing in this project is that, as we did with the erosion, a person who gets a letter can call the council and speak to myself or one of my team, and we will work them through the information we hold. They can email and respond. We've set up a natural hazards email webpage, and like the last time, we've actually set up 11 community sessions around the city, running from 3 to 6 over the end of this month and through majority of September. A person can go onto our website and book a 30-minute slot, and they get a one-on-one conversation with council staff about the information to help them work through the information we hold. So we're trying to, as we did with the erosion, provide as much of an avenue of contact with council staff to aid in the sharing of the information and what it means, because we're talking about long-term change, not present-day situation risk, and that is always difficult to receive information on. Sir.
Thank you, Campbell. Appreciate that. Questions? Councillor Kurak, Councillor Malloy and Brown.
Thank you, Campbell. Obtaining the information and projecting is one thing, but you mentioned planning, and my particular question is around the 1 in 500. We said that we could have to plan for it. What circumstances would we have to plan for a 1 in 500, please? The simple answer is actually prudence, okay, and that would be a pragmatic space, because we need to be quite careful not to ignore the consequences of large-scale events, okay? But actually, in a regulatory sense, the regional policy statement written by our regional council requires us to undertake natural hazard risk assessments for a range of natural hazards as part of all plan making and plan changes that provide for intensification, provide for land use change. The 3 scenarios that we must consider using 1.25 metres of sea level rise is a 50-year, a 100-year and a 500-year. And the purpose of that is you need 3 events in which to take a risk conversation and natural hazard planning. Okay? If I say let's plan for the 50-year event, we are going, well, that might seem pragmatic to us. We can produce a model and an extent of a line. But what would happen if we got a slightly larger than 50-year event? Would those people that became inundated that we didn't protect thank us long term? So we're not saying that we will impose regulation for the 500 year. We're using it as an outlier within a risk conversation to ensure that we've considered the consequences of that event and then whether we need to turn our mind to it. Part of that may be regulation, part of that may be do nothing because the risks are acceptable, part of that might be actually working with the council long term to adapt to providing protection. We might not put in place protection today, but you might put in place protection in 50 years' time and want to have a plan ready to respond. Thank you, that was a very clear answer.
Councillor Malloy.
Yeah, Cam. The sea level rise, I think, 0.4 to 1.6, is it over 100 years? Did I understand you correctly when you said that is a legislative or government requirement that we do that?
Yes, sir. So in our regional policy statement, they have a policy on sea level rise in all our planning that generally equates to 1.25 metres of sea level rise. So that's a regulatory document we must give effect to. However, in 2018, the Ministry for the Environment updated the coastal hazard guidance. Within that, it requires a consideration of a range of sea level rise scenarios up to 1.6 metres. So in terms of your Te Timu planning, your Taurika West, you're using 1.6 metres. In intensification planning, you actually need to use a range which includes up to 1.6 metres.
Supplementary for me, given that it is a requirement from above, are we able to make that clear when we sometimes notify people that they have potential, you have some difficulties ahead of them? Can we make it clear that it's a government or is the regional council, what's their responsibility in that, given that they are in their environmental council and also that looks after the harbour and the harbour margins?
So in our FAQ and on our website, we actually are quite clear that the scenarios we use come from the Ministry for the Environment, and we have a link back to that in some of their FAQ and fact sheets. And in all the conversations I generally have, I'm very clear about that document. I'm not here to tell people which sea level rise scenario is there, and as often I come to this room and I say, I'm not here to debate climate science and sea level rise. What we are doing is having a implementation of government policy or guidance, regional council policy, and then we are trying to make our pathway with providing for a compact city and your intensification program and your long-term planning needs. So I'm quite clear around where that document and guidance sits, so I don't have to, I suppose, deal with the forthcoming issues that flow from the why do we use those scenarios.
Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Kim. I really appreciate the level of detail that you've given us, and also how much you're turning your mind to being available for the community to come and talk to you, acknowledging it's quite a complex issue. Last time when we talked about this with the flooding, you were preparing for an influx of phone calls and everything. And you didn't receive the amount of inquiries that you thought. Do you think this will be the same? Are you expecting that same level of or the not level of inquiry? Do you have a gut feel for that? Because I think last time you were over prepared and didn't quite get the subscription you thought, which is a good thing, I'm saying, not a bad thing.
In this case, I'd rather be over-prepared. So when we sent out the erosion information, it's one of the largest natural hazard mail-outs we did. That was 1,080 odd, 1,800 actually. This is 5,500. So even if I worked on a 5 to 10% uptake of wanting conversation, that's quite a lot of time. So we've made sure we've got 3 staff available for that whole month to answer phone calls and emails. And then we've got these 11 open days, and those 11 open days have 4 half-hour sessions every 30 minutes. And we've got 4 or 5 council staff and 4 or 5 external staff from the companies we work with and from the regional council to help that. We will just cancel open days that we don't need, which is what we did. We had no one for the erosion in the Mount. Most of our data sets or meetings we've set up are in the Mount this time because of the extent. I would work on a minimum of around 5% will be contacting us. Yeah.
I'm interested in that. Are you planning anything specific for local iwi and hapu tangata whenua, like a marae meeting? Some MP might want to have a comment on that, but whether there's any value in something specifically for that community, particularly Matapihi?
Today, through Takawangi, we've sent out an email outlining that this information has gone to marae and to Māori landowners, and we've given my contact details, so any one of those who received that letter can come back to us. And we actually started this conversation of release of this information with our mana whenua groups in around late last year, November, December, progressing towards what this information means and what these changes are.
Councillor Clout, and then I think we'll take a
thank you very
Councillor
much,
Robson, and I'll
Cam.
take a motion.
I'm just on our website now, and it's a very helpful tool actually, and you can put in the various levels of sea level rise and storm event. So if I go to the worst case scenario, 1.6 metres and a 0.2% AEP, which I guess is your 500-year return, the whole of our Timanga wastewater treatment plant is underwater and also our airport. So are our internal staff and asset managers going to be taking very good consideration of this data going forward in planning?
If we want to, we can pull up the viewer. I did it on our website. Yes, they are, and you'll remember you've actually set up a resilience project, and this data, along with future data sets, actually feeds into this. The key thing we need to remember is when you put on 1.6 metres of sea level rise and a 500-year return period event, just think about what that means from your airport's perspective. It's going to be closed anyway, right? Planes aren't in the air flying through cyclonic events. While there is inundation over that land, it is at high tide. When the storm recedes or the tide goes down, you can actually respond by cleaning up the tarmac and planes can land again. These are not all-day inundation scenarios every single day. They are storm events that have a probability of occurring and a low probability of occurring. So we can't just jump into, hey, Tamanga's a slightly different story because of the environmental effects. And the Resilience Project and some of the other work that is going on is looking at what are the things that we need to do and which to manage risk appropriately. Okay.
Councillor Robson.
Happy to move,
Oh,
Chair.
okay, then speak to it. Okay, move Councillor Robson. I will second it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I thank you, Cam, as ever. This is just part of having an informed community. It's an obligation we have, but it's not just a legislative one, it's a moral one. When you have information, you should share it. For those asking about 1 in 500 events, an interesting article in Washington Post a couple of years ago, Houston now experiencing its third 500-year flood in 3 years. How is this possible? The article will explain to you how it works. Just reminds you that 1 in 500 is more often than you think.
Any other speakers? Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. While it's good to have these maps, we also need to understand the cost implications going forward too. With the resilience project works, there will be cost implications flowing out from that with the long-term plan. So just to mention that as well.
To reply, I shall put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, that's carried. Move to DC 264, consideration of planning pathways, and I think we have Janine Speedy to present to us, probably Andy Mead as well. Thank you, Andy and Janine. Take us away.
Good afternoon. So this report is the consideration of the planning pathways for a number of our plan changes going forward. So the presentation today, I'll give you a brief overview of the standard plan change process, which we currently or in the past have gone through. An overview of the streamlined planning process, which was brought in with the last Resource Management Act review or reforms. We have had some discussions to date, which I'll give an overview, and the plan changes that we're looking to consider as part of the streamlined planning process. So as I said, we've traditionally, in the past, the Resource Management Act has only provided one plan change pathway, which we used. The most recently was some minor changes to the Tarako Business Estate and the plan changes for the Wairakei Urban Growth Area. So in the Resource Management Act, those timeframes are very much quite clear about that process. There is no ability to change that. So for example, when you must go through a submission process that is a minimum of 4 weeks, you must go through a further submission process and to a hearing. The timeframes that it takes for the standard plan change process is at least 2 years, and that really depends on your appeals. So to give you an example, for the Wairakei Urban Growth Area, the recent plan change we did for that, we received 4 appeals, and that took over a year to resolve those 4 appeals. So that's an example of the additional time that it takes. The streamlined planning process came through with the Resource Management Act reforms, and what it does is provides councils the ability to tailor the plan change process. So there's a couple of things, is that you are still required to do some kind of consultation process, but you're able to make a recommendation about what those timeframes are. So the process is that the council work through what they want their plan change process to be. They make an application to the minister, and then the minister, if they accept that, then they will set out that in the direction. We need to make sure that when we're making an application to the minister that we meet the Gateway criteria. So we've been advised that you obviously need to meet at least one, but it's advisable to meet 2 of those criteria, and that's set out in paragraph 7 of the report. The big thing with or quite a significant change, is that there is no right of appeal through the Environment Court. You can have a judicial review to the High Court, and the timeframes are significantly reduced. So generally through the streamlined planning process, depending on the process that council sets out, it is 12 to 15 months. So the discussions we've had to date, we have spoken to a couple of other councils. This is, as I said, reasonably new, so there's actually only a handful of councils to talk to. But we've talked to Hastings District Council, who have been through the process from start to finish. Porirua, who have a number of streamlined planning processes. They're in the middle, in the thick of it, as we say now. And also Rotorua Lakes, who have a draft application with the Minister. The ranging plan changes that they have, those councils have used, are generally both greenfield, but also some brownfield plan changes. Some of the key learnings from that is that it is significantly resource intensive. So yes, the timeframes are shortened, but it does require staff resources to be dedicated to these plan changes. But they saw that the process generally worked quite well. We've also had a meeting and discussions with the Ministry of the Environment and Housing and Urban Development, and we've talked through the plan changes that we consider are appropriate to consider through the streamlined planning process, and they are in agreement that it is appropriate for us to consider that, and they understand why we are proposing the streamlined planning process and the importance of it, and we will continue to work with them as we work through these processes. So the first set of plan changes that we'd like to work through the streamlined planning process is the intensification plan changes. So obviously we provided you an update at the 23rd of July Urban Form and Transport Development Committee. These plan changes we discussed at that point in time do need to be considered as one package. They're quite intertwined in terms of the information requirements and how we're kind of drafting the plan provisions. You'll see up in the presentation we have set out the 3 criteria that we consider these plan changes meet and the reason for why. I think we all are aware of our requirements under the National Policy Statement for Urban Development Capacity and our housing shortage needs that we need to address as soon as we can. The other plan change is the stormwater plan change, and we've discussed in the past the importance of this plan change going at the same time as the intensification plan changes. So the flooding from intense rainfall plan change is to meet our requirements under the regional policy statement and must be notified at the same time. And again, we've set up out on the presentation the criteria that we consider that this plan change meets and the reason why it meets that criteria. So we've kind of set out here, and also in the report under the different options are the positives and negatives of going through the streamlined planning process. As I said, it is you can shorten your timeframes as there are no appeal rights. Because of now seeking for a resolution to notify these plan changes next year, we can make up time when we were trying to notify by September. We need to remember also that once these plan changes become operative, our city planning team will be moving very quickly or straight away into the city plan review. So there is that opportunity to review some of the decisions made to the city plan review. And also it's consistent obviously with the urban development capacity. Yep.
So just a couple of points there. One is in terms of picking up Janine's point around moving into city plan review. If we move through a streamlined planning process here, we can reallocate resources to that much needed review of the full city plan much more quickly. think we need to bear that in mind. But importantly, the government are releasing a suite of national policy statements. The first one of which has been released in draft form, which is the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Soils. It is in draft, but it is setting quite a high bar going forward in terms of the use of highly productive soils for urban development. Across the board, our future plans for urban development, aside from Te Tumu, all affect highly productive soils. So it is putting some further risk and uncertainty around some of those projects, potentially adding time and cost to those projects, and I guess meaning that in terms of addressing our housing requirements, there is going to be more focus on intensification, and it is something we might be able to move more quickly with. I guess therefore being a reason to consider the streamlined plan change process. The National Policy Statement on Urban Development, which is a much updated and expanded version of the current National Policy Statement on Urban Development Capacity, is likely to be released later this week. It is being released to a small subset of people under embargo at the moment, so I cannot speak too much about it, but only to say that it very much reinforces the direction of these plan changes, and will push us in the direction of much more intensification enablement through our city plans. So the quicker we can, I guess, align with that general direction, probably the better for our sake.
So there are some disadvantages or risks that we need to be aware of in progressing with the streamlined planning process. So as I outlined, Porirua, who are working through that plan change process in the thick of it and finding it very resource intensive. So as I said, when we set out the process, the council set out the timeframes. So if we set aside, for example, 2 weeks to prepare our hearings report, you have 2 weeks to prepare your hearings report. Or to say summarise submissions, if you've only got 50 submissions, it may be okay, we may have 200 submissions. So these are the kinds of things that we need to consider and be aware of, and be very prepared to be able to deal with the process within the timeframes. As I said, you cannot appeal to the Environment Court. That is a process that is not available. However, as Andy pointed out, and myself, there is the full city plan review to revisit some of these provisions. There is a risk that the community members feel that they can't be involved if they can't appeal, but we will still be having a significant consultation period, because we know these intensification plan changes is proposing change within existing urban areas. And there are other things that we can do within the process to try and minimise that risk. So, for example, we do have the option of building in other processes that aren't in the current plan change process, and that's things like having a period of mediation prior to going to a hearing. So having pre-hearing mediation, that is something that we can feed and we can actually add into the process to try and reduce some of these risks. And finally, the Minister does make the final decision. So once the recommendation is made by the panel, that is sent to the Minister, and they will make the final decision on the plan change. So the process from here is, if it is agreed that the streamlined planning process is appropriate to proceed with these plan changes, we would prepare at starting point as a draft application for the intensification plan changes and the flooding stormwater plan change. As we highlighted at the last meeting, we're still developing our draft detailed provisions, which are currently going through all the testing. We are currently underway with our values engagement through the Te Papa Spatial Plan, which is linked to the intensification plan changes, and we'll continue that wider engagement throughout until the end of the year in preparation of the public consultation, and we're still aiming to seek for notification of the plan changes in early 2020. So if there's any questions.
Thank you. I might just fire one and then we'll come to others. Councillor Carrack and Brown next. Just in regard to paragraph 7, Janine, and you've picked out the 3 criteria that we think we achieve. Just surprised that 7C is not included, is required to meet a significant community need. The lack of housing, the lack of land for housing, I would have thought would have got us through the bar on that as well.
Yes, we've included that as part of one of the criteria in the presentation.
Policy I saw. It's required to meet something. I will implement national direction. Sorry, I missed that one. Councillor Carrack?
Yeah, I did definitely identify them because I looked at those first 3 thinking they were the key ones, and I was pleased to see them up on the slideshow. It's very good. Thank you, Janine. Now, in terms of the decision-making process, like you mentioned the panel, so perhaps your view of that panel. So it will be the panel, a recommendation to council, and then the minister. Is that how it will go?
As I understand with the process, that it is the recommendation of the panel goes straight to the minister. Well, that's up to council. So, for example, I suppose that's a decision to be made. So, with the last set of plan changes that we progressed, we're in a really interesting space that if we are, depending on the outcomes of elections next year, we, for those elected members who wish to be on the panel, you need to make sure that you have the right certification, so you are able to sit on that panel. So that's something that needs to be considered, and we do have some staff that can. So for example, Hastings, they had an independent chair, and then they had 3 panel members who listened to the elected members on the panel.
So we will be bringing a report to the next council in terms of options to make up a hearings panel. Yep. And some of those options could include elected members.
Yeah, so that will be at the notification, when
Yes.
you seek notification.
Further comment from Christine Jones?
One of the things the elected members will need to consider next year is that this all will coincide with the LTP work, so there's going to be a very heavy workload on the incoming council through the 2020 calendar year to flow into the LTP, and there's also going to be a very, very high workload in terms of these 2 plan changes. So whether it's actually feasible for elected members to be able to do both is a question that you'll have to think about when you're making that decision on who sits on the panel. It's quite a number of hours involved in both processes.
Follow up to that. So given, shortcomings in a way of the consultative process, because we are, making it a lot shorter and there's not the ability to appeal, I think it's important that that is somehow balanced in terms of that final decision. So given how critical, in my opinion, I'm just anticipating what discussion will be had once the report comes to us. So in your mind, how could some of these factors be weighed up at the end of the day? I suppose that will be in the report. I'm just trying to tease out something, because we're making a decision here, we're heading down a certain track, so it'd be nice to have a good feel of what we're actually talking about at the end of the day. And I hear the issues around, elected member capacity.
Yeah, I guess there's just a couple of things. Probably the most important, though, is that in order to notify the plan change, this council or the future council needs to sign it off. So we need to bring the full provisions back to you. So there needs to be a degree of comfort, even when we're getting right at the start of that process, that you're happy to put that out for consultation. Now that plan change can move and change and quite significantly through the process. So there certainly will be some options where you can consider some sort of elected member involvement on those hearings panels. Typically though, in large urban areas, more recently, they have been independent hearings panels with multiple people sitting on those, which bring their particular speciality. And that will include tangata whenua skills as part of that mix. So, but that will be certainly a decision for the next council, and we will put together a thorough paper covering the options that are available and the pros and cons of those.
Thank you. Was it Brown, Councillor Brown next, was it? Yes, and then Malloy, Morris and Stewart.
Completely different question. What did Hamilton do? Because I've got some photos here. I'll just send to the elected members of Kalani Road and Hamilton, where they've got intensification, and they seem to have done theirs quickly. Did they do a plan change or anything like this, or did they just follow that? Did they do a streamlined plan change, or was it just already in their city plan? How?
No, so I've only talked to the councils that have done the streamline, which is Hastings, Rotorua and Porirua.
Yeah, so the Hamilton's intensification provisions were delivered through their last review of their district plan, which, yeah, so that occurred through a sort of 5+ year process, quite recently.
Which
Okay.
they're reviewing at the moment.
Malloy.
Thank you for that, guys. One thing the RMA did, and that did protect people's rights to some extent, and also their right to appeal. And but you have covered that off. But that is an area that does concern me. The other area that you're probably already well over it, and I know we are, is our neighbouring councils, the Regional and Western Bay, that they are kept abreast of what we're proposing and doing, and we're making sure that we're working with them hand in hand all the way through. Just want some clarification on that, or certainty.
Yes, so we are in regular contact with both councils. So Western Bay District Council are currently progressing a plan change to their residential zones, and so we're looking to compare notes and where we can align. And obviously through these plan changes we have ongoing discussions with Regional Council. We are meeting with, depending on the outcomes of this meeting, we are also meeting with them again to provide an update on where we're at with our plan changes and also what planning pathway is decided.
So just in addition to that, so tomorrow at the Smart Growth Committee, Christine and myself will be presenting on intensification, so that will bring their councils up to speed with that. But from a process perspective, the Ministry for the Environment are quite clear that we need to get the regional councils, I guess, support or comfort to progress with a streamlined process, and we will also need to undertake pre-engagement and consultation with tangata whenua before that process is approved by the Minister.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Then Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Can you give me an example of a time when council has had a policy redrafted as a result of an appeal to the Environment Court? Or where a provision of the policy has been redrafted and has led to better community outcomes?
We did have an appeal on the density provisions, so that was something that the three councils, and we settled that at through discussions and negotiations with all the parties. But there was an Environment Court appeal, so the developers, the three council, NZTA, were all involved in that, and it was a TCC district plan provision as it was at that time.
But we've had four, the earlier example, 4 appeals to Wairakei, obviously Greenfield different to the Brownfield, but can you give me an example of some of the changes that were made following those appeals?
Yeah, so Plan Change 25, which was the Wairakei urban growth area, we had 4 appeals made. One of them, the Environment Court deemed to be out of scope, and the other 3 were with developers and with NZTA. So one was significant in that it dealt with the noise wall, but what it did really was it dealt with the ins and outs of the writing of the rule, and it was they were all resolved through mediation, and it was more a redrafting of that rule and negotiation between council, the landowner and NZTA. And that's why I see merit in us considering pre-hearing mediation, because that's where you can actually work through some of those rules. So there was no, I would say, through those appeals, there was no policy change. It was more of a cleaning up or a tidying up and seeking more clarification through some of the rules. So they were, in my mind, although they took a significant time and cost, the outcome was essentially the same and quite minor in nature.
Next is Councillor Stewart and then Councillor Carrack.
Thank you. If I remember rightly, the city plan review, you could have all elected members as long as half were qualified commissioners. Is that still the case?
That's something I'll have to seek clarification. So at the moment we're preparing our manual for the full city plan review and who's able to sit on the panel.
I think Christine's saying she'll check, but pretty sure that was only a transitional provision until enough councillors got commissioner trained. Now it has to be all, but we'll check on it, I think.
Good to know for sure.
Yeah.
From my recollection, even through that transition, this council had passed a resolution or given direction that you wanted to be qualified commissioners to be doing that work. So we've sort of worked off that base and checked the legal
Thanks,
basis.
Christine. It'd be good to know what the legislation requirement is.
When we bring the actual decision on this.
The Morris, you remember? Came up at our course that they said it was 100%. Councillor Carrack?
Just further on that subject, I can understand some requirement to have RMA training when we're looking at making decisions that can be appealed in the Environment Court, because we're trying to avoid, councillors making decisions that aren't consistent with the Act and therefore appeal to the Environment Court and that being overturned. But in this situation, we don't have an ability to appeal to the Environment Court. So the question around, do councillors need training around RMA is, in my mind, sort of disappears. So that's an interesting thing I would like to have considered. Now, in terms of the previous experience around councils going through a streamlined process, but more so around brownfields, because that's where the issue is. You get the NIMBY thing. In the councils that you mentioned, I think one's Porrick Rural or somewhere, did they do brownfield? And if so, what were some of the real issues there?
So Porirua are doing both brownfield and greenfield, and they're in the middle of the process now. So they haven't. Hastings is the only council that has actually gone through the process from start to finish, and that was predominantly greenfield, but it did have a small portion of brownfield. Some key things was their learnings from that is to be open and clear through your consultation about the changes being made. But other than that, they didn't advise me of any issues or any difficulties they had in working through that process with the community.
All right, I'm happy to move. If there are no more questions, if I have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Clout. Very well presented. Thank you, Andy and Janine. I don't think we have a lot of leeway. We're going to have to balance this issue of public involvement, appeal rights and so on, but coming down the pipeline from the government, from policy statements, are some pretty strong directives to us. And we know we already have a situation in our community where we have a lack of land supply. We need to intensify. We need to provide more range of housing options. And so I fully support pursuing the streamlined approach that is now provided under the RMA amendment to facilitate this as quickly as possible, but still doing our best to incorporate the concerns of the community as we go through the process, I think. Councillor Clout.
Thank you. I'm constantly amazed, as I think of most people, how long plan changes do take to implement. So anything that we can do to speed this up, I think has got to be a good thing. Balancing off the broader community consultation. Yeah, there's lots of push factors and lots of pull factors in this decision, and I think we need to make this as quick and as streamlined as possible, so I support it.
Other speakers? Councillor Robson, Councillor Morris, Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to support it at this stage, but there are some caveats. We do have within the streamlined process the ability, when we write to the Minister, to say we'd like this level of consultation or propose a level of consultation. So it doesn't get rid of consultation. We need to make sure that stays there. I think that we also need to recognise that, leaving aside an issue with the Environment Court, we're not bringing things forward that much. Let's not believe that we're moving from 20 years to 2 weeks here. You know, the figures put up by staff was sort of 24 months down to 15 months. You know, the great fullness of a city's development, that 9 months probably isn't that critical, so we need to be careful there. I also think we need to take some care in considering panels and the empanelling of councillors and what that means. And if there is an intent or an expectation amongst staff that they would be recommending councillor participation, then I think it's quite important that the induction of the new councillors in the new triennium, or all councillors in the new triennium, encourages all councillors to get the appropriate qualifications to participate. We don't want to be in a situation where we wind up with a recommendation from staff with best intent that effectively deprives some people of the opportunity of taking part in what is a process that will be extremely high interest to our community. But it doesn't get rid of consultation. It isn't an amazing silver bullet. It's a sensible alternative. If we're going to use councillors, we need to make sure everyone's forewarned so able to participate. But I see no good reason for objecting to what seems to be a valid second approach. So happy to support.
Thank you, Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The inclusion of elected representatives of the community on plan changes should be the rule and not the exception. That is one of the core reasons for having a representative democracy, that those chosen by the community are able to make the decisions on behalf of the community in terms of the planning regime of their city. So it should be the rule rather than the exception, and I do accept the upskilling argument advocated by Councillor Robson. That's not a bad argument at all. I do liken it to MPs not making law in Parliament because they're not qualified to, so we should just get the judges to write the law. That would be entirely inappropriate, and it would be, in my view, inappropriate for that to be business as usual in city councils, because I can tell you I've met some dumb MPs in my time. I can tell you that right now. And no, there's no present MPs around the table, but I've met some dumb MPs in the past, and I can tell you that I would certainly trust many of the people around this table to write laws on my behalf than some of the MPs that I have met. So I just wanted to make that clear in my view. Secondly, in terms of the planning framework and the planning process in New Zealand, we have a very legislative RMA-centric planning regime. There's no role for advocacy planning. There's no role for the broader term of planning in New Zealand. And it is my view that going down this so-called streamlined, you can tell Nick Smith's come up with that one, streamlined. What a great word to put on the top of a bill that becomes an act, streamlined. Think about what the definition of streamlined is and how does that fit into law. Anyway, it's to do with aerodynamics. So in terms of the issue of stripping our community's appeal rights to the Environment Court for argument's sake, for 9 months benefit, I do oppose that. I do understand, yes, there is an NPS in train, but it's the principle of it. Everybody bags the RMA until you're the neighbour. And then I think we've received several comments recently via email regarding a supposed consent which hasn't even been applied for down in Turret Road or around there in Burrow Street. So hang on a minute, whoops, everybody gets really upset when their rights are stripped away, including principals of certain companies which advise developers. They get really upset when it's the boot's on the other foot. So I do oppose this motion. I think by stripping the appeal rights of our community at this stage is a top-down directive approach which will become a rod for the next council's back. And when people come in here and they want to discuss it with you, I would like to see those who vote for this motion, if they're still around, to courageously tell people who come in here why you stripped their appeal rights away. Why you think for the sake of 9 months you wanted to strip their appeal rights away for a planning regime that is going to affect the city for the next 30 to 50
Point
years.
of order, it's not 9 months.
That's not a
Stripping
point
the
of
appeal
order.
rights is
That is
9
not a
months.
point of order, please. Mr. Chair, I
Sorry,
ask that if
sorry.
there's a point of order,
Well-
that it be referring to an actual standing order.
Sorry, he may raise a point of order. And what was the point of order?
Yeah, I think the information being put by the councillor is incorrect, factually incorrect.
Point of order,
It's not a point of
disagreement
order.
is not a point of order.
That's-
I ask
that-
you to rule on that, Mr. Chair.
There's not a point of order. Continue, Councillor Morris.
Thank you very much. So in terms of moving forward as a community, it is a very top-down approach, and we've gone through this with the special housing areas, and we have not ended up with affordable housing as a result. We've ended up with a greater supply of extremely unaffordable housing. And so it's not going to do anything to impact homelessness, it's not going to do anything to address affordability, in my view. But what it will do is get the communities back up, and if we are going to have a participatory democracy, then we need to act like it and challenge some of the advice we are receiving and show a little backbone, elected backbone, from time to time.
Thank you. Councillor Carrack is next.
Yeah, we're all aware of the current situation in terms of housing. There's a lot of very desperate people out there. And the roof over your head, we know, is the number one need for people, so it's very sad. And if we can accommodate it somehow in terms of making the process a bit easier to add more housing to our city, we need to consider it. I think in terms of Councillor Morris's concern, there are stages that we'll have input into before that final plan is notified. So we need to consider the impact on people then and what's reasonable. In terms of progressing it quickly, and Councillor Clout used the words as quick and streamlined as possible, I'd like to suggest that as possible is not appropriate. I mean, I would like to use the term as quick and streamlined as fair and reasonable, and that's what Councillor Morris is referring to, because we do need to be fair and reasonable about what we're imposing on the residents in the brownfield in particular. So yeah, I will support it. We've got a certain way to go on this, and I look forward to our next discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Carrack. Next is Te Pio Kawaia.
Ai, kia ora tātou, kia ora Mr. Chair. I definitely support the option of looking for a more efficient and effective way of reaching our decisions in terms of plan changes. And the option that we've got in front of us, while it does speed up the process, I think that I echo the same concerns that others have around finding that balance, around the engagement with our communities, and finding that opportunity where we can hand on heart say that the loss of the appeal to the Environmental Court is balanced by other opportunities. The other opportunity that has been raised is the pre-hearing, but I think there needs to be stronger weight in the way the information is actually delivered. So I think what we got in the previous presentation around that inundation is a... It's okay, you can clap as well as ring a bell. It's okay. The point I was getting to was that the way that the information is actually communicated to the community could actually save us a lot of time in getting the message across around the intensification and the information around flooding from rainfall. So the stuff that Cam presented around his kaupapa, around using the web browser or the viewer, whatever you want to call it, is that takes the volumes of paper out of it and gives the community a clearer view around what's going to happen in the area. So I think if we put resource into providing better information moving forward to go out into the community about these particular plan changes that follow on from the work that others are doing, I think you're going to get a better result. Rather than giving them screeds of information to read through and for them to decipher and get a different picture. Because the good thing about having the viewer, so to speak, is that everybody gets the same picture on 3 scenarios. The picture is not left up to their own mind about what intensification and what flooding looks like for them. Everyone gets the same picture. So I think that's the consistency that we need around getting these plan changes over the line, is around getting everybody to the same point. So my point around, yes, I support the option of looking at a more efficient process, is that we need better resources and tools. So the example that we've just received this afternoon, I think is a good example around that. And so if we can, in the papers that are to come back to us, provide us options around how that can be better done for these plan changes, I think that would give us more comfort around getting our people across the line.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Brown, I think you're next.
Just briefly, you'll know what I'm going to say. It's all about engagement and communication and no surprises, so yeah, I support it.
Any other speakers? Councillor Granger, Councillor Molloy.
Yeah, thank you. Look, Pio, just to say thanks. You hit the nail on the head there. It's most important in what we do, and not necessarily what we do, but how we go about it as regards to the community, to bring them in on the scene. It's something that I feel in our past is something we haven't done very, very good at all, and now's the time and opportunity to do that. It's simply this: you've got to keep it simple and user-friendly for them to understand, make sure that they do. A good point, and yes, I will support it. But again, it's only the first step, and I think we've got several to take before we finally agree.
Councillor Molloy.
Yes, I will support, but I do have real concerns about the rights of our community. It takes us so long to do things at time. I realise it's important that we do take that time, but with legislation and with process, by the time we get through things, there's a number of programs in the city here that I'd like to see completed, but I'm afraid I'll be possibly passed on before that happens. But our community must feel they've been heard with whatever we do, however we speed it up. But they must feel they've been heard.
Brownless.
Yep. In times past, of course, city council has determined the city plan or the district plan or whatever it was called then, and the zoning of the city and the rules of the city, and then we also used to sit on panels to then decide how that, to interpret it when people went. We've now removed that part, and I think that's acceptable because that gives professionals the chance to do the actual interpretation, but like having a judge come and say, well, there's the rules, and the judge interpreting the rules. But I do feel a bit more less comfortable about when it comes to a city plan change, not having councils involved. I think they do need to be involved because that's something that you cannot abrogate. Otherwise, the next step is, why do you even have councils and councillors? So I think on those plan change hearing, there must be a majority of elected members. It's all very well to take advice, but in the end, I think the decision should reflect what the community wants in terms of the elected members they put on there. The problems I have with the streamlined planning process, and I do agree with Councillor Morris there, is that it does remove rights that could cause the community to smell a rat even if there isn't a rodent in the pipeline, because it's just the fact that it's taken away. So I do have an issue with that. I think that the problem isn't the fact that people can appeal to an environment court. It's that what happens in practice is that the environment court is so slow and the processes surrounding it are so slow. I wish there was a way of improving that, so to maintain people's rights and also to get a prompt hearing. But this business of stuff dragging on for 1, 2, 3 years, if you know how to use the system in the environment court right, is frustrating, but I'm not sure that we should be eliminating it in this particular case.
You've spoken. Sorry, you only get to speak once, I'm sorry. Any other speakers? Councillor Mason? Not really, it's not transferable, I'm sorry. But I appreciate your sentiment. No other speakers? Right of reply. It's been a really good debate, really good comments. This is really difficult territory to go into. I appreciated Councillor Morris's comments about the way laws are made in the Select Committee, and I won't comment on the thoughts I used to have sitting around the Select Committee table as to whether there was a great deal of intelligence. But we still managed to make good laws because there's a process there that has checks and balances, and we hear from the community, and we do hear from good advisors around that table. I think, as Mayor Brownless has said, that the difference between resource consents and plan changes is very, very clear. And we no longer participate in resource consents. We won't be participating in the if a consent is lodged, we won't be participating in the corrections application, because that's best left to expert commissioners to take the process through. But I think we have an opportunity, if we have elected members on the panels, and I'm very much in favour of it, that we can resolve community issues. We can avoid the potential, what would normally be Environment Court appeals, if we do our part and really work hard on resolving those issues there. We should be able to get most of it sorted. But we do know of the history, we do know of even current situations where some people will appeal regardless. And they are not reasonable appeals, and they do drag the thing on. And in the meantime, the city is waiting for housing. Whether it's a 9-month or whether it's 12 months or whatever, shortening of time, it is worth it, because we do have a crisis of land supply and housing, and it'll never become affordable if we don't get more of it released to the market. So I think we do need to bear that in mind. The SHAs were an interim solution, and they did deliver more housing. They didn't necessarily hit the affordable housing, but they did deliver more housing, and in a faster time frame. So it's a shame we lost that, but now I think we have an opportunity to go through this streamlined process, and I believe we should go forward with that. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Okay, please show of hands. All those in favour? Malloy, Councillor Malloy, Granger, Robson, Kurak, Mason, Brown and Baldock. And those opposed, Mayor Brownless and Councillor Morris. And an abstention from Councillor Stewart. That motion is carried. We can move now to DC 265, growth and land use, on page. Yep. Okay, and Christine Jones will just take us through on an overview, and assisted by Andy Mead.
So under the previous committee structure, we used to bring regular growth reports to the finance and risk. Under the new committee structure, what has happened is that things that relate to longer term growth and land use, and also longer term transport planning, which is a separate report on this agenda, are now coming to this committee. And once those projects become operationalised and we start building things, then they're going into PSOC. So we've sort of split the things in between medium to long term planning, coming to Transport and Urban Development Committee, and once we're into the actual build of projects, like so 15th Ave, once you're into the construction design element, then it becomes a matter that would be reported up to PSOC. So we've split it into two reports. This first one that on your agenda relates to growth and land use planning, so covering all the elements around future land supply, intensification plan changes, etc. So we're happy to answer any questions and also take any feedback if you think there are projects that you would have expected to see on this report but that we haven't included. We're happy to take that feedback and any suggestions that you've got around improving. So our intention is that this would become a regular quarterly report, and in between any substantive reports like what you've got today on particular issues would come, but this would just keep in front of you the work that staff are progressing in the background that will come back for decision making.
Okay, any further comment? Andy, no? So any questions just of those 2 pages, 57 through to 59 of that update? Otherwise, I'll just move receipt of it. There's no formal recommendation there, but I think we'll just receive it as a report. But are there any questions first? Councillor Malloy?
If I could, through the chair, at least, could we have this on a larger font? If possible.
Any question? Therefore, I'll just take a motion to receive the report. Councillor Carrack, seconded by myself. All those or speaking to it, Councillor Carrack.
Nice to be regularly updated.
Yeah. Councillor Brown.
As I say, the same thing. It's a great report, and also hopefully it might reduce the amount of reporting that goes back through PSOC, and so there's no duplication. And this is probably the more logical place for these type of projects.
Excellent. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against, that's carried. Now, DC 266. I just think, as much as I'd like to get through and finish, I think we may have a bit to say about that, in which case we may give you a break here. Because we have someone coming through, we need 10 minutes prior to that in confidential with the staff, 5 minutes. So I think if we have a break now, then we won't have a break after when policy takes over from us. I think if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman of Policy, give you a 10-minute, 15-minute break now for an afternoon tea break and come back. But perhaps we'll move into public excluded now, if I could have a motion for that. Thank you, Councillor Morris. Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Cloud. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. And we will to, we'll just wait till we go online again. We're online, thank you. Welcome back, viewers. All 100 of you. And
So I don't know on
Christine?
these ones whether you want to go through them topic by topic or just page by page, and if there's any specific queries from elected members on any particular topic, we're happy to respond. There are a couple of staff who have been working in the flexi space that'll probably be just making their way to the chambers, who may be able to respond to some detailed questions on particular projects.
I think we're generally happy to go page by page. I mean, it's a good report. There's lots of good information there. Raise issues if you wish to. From the first page, page 63. Anything there? Going on to page 64. I did have something there if no one else has something to raise. Regard to park and rides. Look, I have to confess to some frustration, and I think some others might. Yes, we want to go through a process for the big picture and with a UFTI on principles for a park and ride, and but there is one obvious one that's staring us in the face, and that is at Bay Park. Will BVL want to run one? All we have to do is get regional council to put on an express bus to come into the CBD, and we'd be up and running with something. So can we just, I think everyone's sort of nodding, is that reasonable? We would like that fast-tracked if we could. If it's simply a matter of getting a conversation with the regional council, which we can raise actually at the next PT meeting, will they provide a bus?
So on this, we've received professional advice from 2 different consultancy firms who have analysed the data in terms of the number of people who are likely to use it from there, and they are saying they don't think it's going to give you the level of use, but we can certainly bring that back. The Chief Executive asked the same question. We arranged for consultants to meet with him and work that through. It's absolutely your prerogative if you would wish to pursue it, so we can bring that information to you so you're informed and you can make whichever decision you wish, if that's...
So on this subject, comments?
I mean, my concern is that there's not really enough priority bus lanes to make it an express bus. That's my concern. Although, notwithstanding there is Hewlett's Road, but by the time you muck around driving into Bay Park and go all around the loop to get to the car park and then all the way back in, I'm just not sure it's really going to be advantageous from a time perspective. That's just my initial feeling on it.
Chief Executive to reply.
Look,
to
I have a lot of sympathy for council on this, because all the logic in the world would tell us that the current system should be working, and it's not. In this situation, we have the experts telling us it won't work, but who knows, it might. So, yeah, I don't know. My sense is there's nothing to lose.
Not spending a lot of money on infrastructure, it's all there. Councillor Robson.
On regard to this issue, and thank you for relaxing standing orders, it strikes me there's a process issue here, that if staff do get some information like that, they don't have to always craft a report and bring it to us. They can circulate information to elected members at any time to keep us informed and abreast of things. So that would be of help in this situation, to find out that staff have got information and we haven't seen it, as in fact we heard in a previous discussion. We need to improve that. With regard to the express bus, I think we're talking more non-stop. The words you use when you're talking about transport are important, and you're talking non-stop buses. With regard to flexibility out of regional council, good luck with that, but it's a good argument for us running our own bus service. And I'm with the Chief Executive on this. The amount of commitment we need, given we have the asphalt there already, and all we need is a bus, and I could probably hire one. I'll hire one for a month and see how we go.
Mayor Brownless?
Yes, it's a question of walking the talk, because we've talked about this for many times. We don't need a whole army to organise this. It doesn't need to be some major problem. By the looks of it, the roading is... And you know what? It's then up to those people that have asked for this, and there's a lot of them out there in the community asking for park and ride. It's up to them to then use it. And if they don't, then we've learnt, know what 1,000 studies probably wouldn't tell us, and we would not do any more. But if we do and it works, then we march on from there. But there are plenty of people there singing out and asking us. We get emails from them every second day, we want this, we want that, and then they'll have to actually use it. So I think it's worth doing and trying.
Every person on that bus is one less car going down Hewlett's Road. It's got to be good. Act quick and, try fast, fail. If it fails, we just, Okay, so general agreement there, when we can say let's pick it up.
Well, this particular issue was going to be an issue that was going to be discussed at the workshop on the 9th. If you'd like us to do a wee bit more work, provide the information in anticipation of that workshop, it's probably the best forum to have that conversation.
It's a workshop, but we could bring something back, running out of date, 17th possibly.
Have BVL in the room maybe for that? No? Oh, I feel good already. Something done today. 65. Any questions, comments there? Arataki bus facility. Yes, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. As one who uses the public bus, a bus interchange city centre, I just have question marks about that. And also, if I can just go on to the next page about the public transport, the bus routes. I know the Regional Council are reviewing it at the moment, and I look forward to attending that meeting that's coming up. But unless they do it genuinely and not just a tick the boxes exercise, unless they actually get down and ask people who use the buses or who don't use them because of some valid reason, nothing's going to improve. And then it's a lot of the buses are running around without anyone in them. So it really needs a sensible review. The other day when I was waiting for a bus, there were just buses lined up, about 10 buses in a row along here with holding up all the traffic. So I question whether the city centre is the right place for a bus interchange, and I'm looking forward to going to that regional council meeting that's coming.
I think we all are. And the phase 3 review is going to be where the rubber meets the road, I think. So we'll leave that till the 10th it is, and we're shortening or changing our council meeting so we can be there, I believe. On this page still? Yep.
Yeah, well, page was 65. Obviously, Arataki bus facility, we had some bad news recently about Farm Street. And I'm sort of wrapping the two together for obvious reasons because they're linked in the eyes of the public, if no one else. With regard to the phase 3 situation, which has been raised in relation to this, where are we in terms of getting some input from us in terms of the scope of what it is they're doing? Because I haven't seen much. I go to all the public transport committee meetings and it's just not clear exactly what they're doing, how deep they're prepared to go, when they're going to deliver quality results. I haven't seen a quality brief.
Christine?
So it was to go on the previous PT meeting that was scheduled. It was withdrawn by the staff. Been in email correspondence with the regional council staff, and they're looking to set a meeting up with our staff this week or next week to get some input. So once we've got something that we can share, I haven't yet been provided with a copy of the draft report. So
The issue I've got is the same as the issue Councillor Stewart's raised. Bus interchanges are part of systems. Phase 3 is part of designing a system. I've had conversations outside with people who operate in the sphere currently, real life bus planners, operators, designers, operations directors. And I'm just worried that I got nothing to work with. I've got no paper, no documents, no...
we don't yet have a copy of the report for the 10th. There are conversations happening at a staff level. Once, if we have information and we can share that, we will. We just don't have it at this point. Those meetings are being, as I said, set up for this week. So I would expect that we would be able to do something similar to what we do with the smart growth meetings. Once we know what's going to be on the agenda, that we can meet with you and brief you. We're not in a position to do that at this point. Yeah.
Specifically ask the Chief Executive to request the Chief Executive of Regional Council to give us that report as early as possible, so we have time to perhaps socialise it amongst ourselves and go to that meeting prepared. We know the chair of the meeting always allows us to sit there and contribute, as well as our official representation. So that getting it early will be crucial, I think. We can do that. Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. The people I wait downstairs here for the bus want to know why the screen doesn't work. Is there anyone in the chamber that can answer? There used to be like the bus 40's coming or whatever, but there's nothing showing on it now. It hasn't been for some time.
No, have you raised that with anybody who might be able to fix that?
Who would I raise it with?
Or request for service,
All
call
right.
centre, or
Okay.
Jane at the front counter would have been able to pick that CCM process, yeah. But now that you've mentioned it, we can pick it up and ensure it's followed up.
So just finally on page 65, any other questions? I note that we now call the Arataki a bus facility, which I think is a really good term, because then Councillor Robson doesn't have a reaction to the interchange. I suggest the city centre one ought to be called the same thing. It is a bus facility. It is a terminal, really, the major terminal in the whole network, and we should change that terminology, because we know the interchange thing has been questioned by the public. So if we could please change that. Page 66, are we? Cameron Road corridor improvements. Questions? Yes, Councillor Carrack.
Now, if members can turn to page 71, now I'm talking about the bus priority and our discussions around clearways. When you look at that chart on 71, and to some extent the chart below that, what that tells me is the bus timetable is not fit for purpose, because it's constant basically throughout the day that the buses would run late. It needs to be, that bus timetable needs to be tweaked by a couple of minutes, and then we'd be okay. Because I was expecting to see major, peak times during that period, and I don't see that. So, to me that doesn't support a clearway. But when, on contrast, you go down to some of the others, Greaton to Pies Par, and Councillor Baldock will be very aware, there are major delays in terms of those peaks. So clearways are pretty essential in those areas. So just point it out. Has the question been asked of the Regional Council in terms of that graph and what it tells us that, hey, how does that fit in terms of your timetable? Because then, by looking at that, was it designed so they can point to us saying, well, we're the clearways, where really the problem was the timetable.
Can we sum up, and can we, if there's any comment from staff there, do those 4 graphs show us what, because we're interpreting something that's not exactly clear, but does it show us what Councillor Carrack is saying? And with the Cameron Road one down at Greaton, to me it leaps out at you that there is a huge delay in the AM period going south, and that's what we were trying to address. So, and we need to refer now back to the Regional Council for that, could you?
So in terms of the issue regarding timetable, the issue with having a corridor like Cameron Road and being able to factor in an efficient timetable is the variability of those services. So it's not a case to say that the Regional Council timetable isn't accurate. It's to say that the timetable and process that we've had to go through to develop that timetable has had to factor in the variability through the corridor. Therefore, we're not able to factor in the timetable as effectively as they possibly would have if it was bus priority. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, sort of. But when you look at on page 71, the bulk of the blue, there's a big chunk there. Sure, there's variability with those few spikes here and there, but it's that baseline that seems to be set at the wrong point, and perhaps the Regional Council needs to adjust that to bring up that red line up to about
the point where all those sort of, the bottom of those major spikes, which is the variability, and therefore would cause less frustration in terms of buses running late or not running to the timetable.
So there's certainly that issue potentially there. But I guess the point is that if you compared that to being able to drive without congestion down that corridor, if you were to move it up to 5 or 6 minutes, that's certainly a lot slower than you would be able to go on a bus with clearways in place. And what you see with these graphs, both of them, is that in many instances, buses are taking in excess of 14 minutes, upwards of 25 minutes in some isolated cases to drive that short length of Cameron Road. So there is significant congestion down there, and clearways will provide a significant benefit in terms of speeding up buses, but also very much in the case of reliability when you get those congested periods down Cameron Road.
Okay. So we'll ponder that. Page 66. We are still on, right? Councillor Catherine Stewart.
Thank you. Through the chair, what's the advantage of a clearway if the buses still have to stop regularly to pick up and drop off passengers?
So the clearway, in terms of dropping off and picking off, in terms of at the minute they've got to pull into bus stops to drop off passengers. In the clearway, they wouldn't have to pull in and pull out. The clearway would act as a bus stop as well. That's one of the reasons why we can't do a T3 lane. But it's also allows, especially when there's congestion, so from 9th to 15th, it would give them a jump ahead of that congestion, that queued congestion. So even though they've still got to stop, it means they wouldn't be stopped in the congestion.
Just one thing. What I've noticed is, most people are good when buses are trying to pull out. Most people will give way to the bus, but they don't always, and the bus can be sitting waiting for a long time. Now in Sydney, for example, there's a sign on the back of the bus: you give way to the bus when the bus pulls out. Obviously, when the driver uses the right-hand signal first, not just whoops out. Can we give that consideration to that here? Because to me, that would make a big difference.
I'm not an engineer, but I understand that is an NZT, as the legal road rule, rather than something we can address.
So the government being keen on multimodal and all that, we should just be able to ask them to change the rules to enable that, because it just stands out as common sense to me, and you don't have to worry about special lanes. You give the courtesy, as many people do, but not all, and let the bus out, and that could work wonders if we could try it.
I'd want us just to think about what we're asking, because we don't want to get too much into detail here now. So can we try and get on to next page, possibly? Councillor Robson.
Look alike, I can see why. Just following up Councillor Kurek's observation, and really a question to staff, just to clarify the point that Councillor Kurek was making, the 8th Avenue to 16th Avenue weekdays, southbound, so this is page 71, but it relates obviously to the topic of the Cameron Road corridor. But on the chart on page 71, what we see there is timetabled 3 minutes 21 seconds, I assume that says. And on the northbound on the same stretch, we're timetabled 1 minute longer. And I'm just wondering, I'm just clarifying, is Councillor Kurek's suggestion actually valid? Because it seems to be that we have a tighter timetable that we fail on, and the longer timetable we succeed on. And one of the key determinants of bus utilisation is reliability. If you can predict your journey time, if you know when you're going to get on, that you arrive at destination in time for whatever it is you've arrived at your destination for. Is that interpretation correct? We have a shorter effect timetabling. Staff have produced these charts, so I assume they understand them, so they should be able to answer the question.
Come from the Regional Council. So this was a request of information for the last meeting this came to. This information has been sourced from the Regional Council. So and clear, I think.
Request
is
clarification
sufficient.
from the
Yeah.
regional council. Let's give staff time to do that.
Yep.
Let us move on to page 67. No, we're going to move on to page 67, please. We've got a heap a lot stuff to do yet in policy committee.
Yeah, we can.
Move on
Yep.
to 67 and we will ask for further clarification on this coming back.
We can ask regional council to come and present, and you've also asked previously some data on the
Yep.
bus system, and I'll get some of that sitting in my inbox, and I'll get that to you as part of the Friday email. So the
Thank
purpose
you.
of this was just to report back. You've asked us to carry on with the work, so we are continuing with the stakeholder engagement and then the wider stakeholder engagement. And the conversations that we've had with MHUD and Kaingaroa, they see this Cameron Road and intensification and moving to multimodal as a critical element, and certainly the government is closely watching us in this space to see that we're actually linking up what we're saying about higher density, supporting PT and alternative modes in the action that council's actually delivering on the ground. So it's actually a really important first step in showing in demonstrable efforts by council down that track. So it's important from that perspective.
If you have further comments or things, put it in an email and it will be responded to. We're on page 67 now.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Can I
Yes.
just make a comment here?
Certainly.
This is very, very important to us all. And just let me finish. Transportation is at the top of our priority. Now, I don't personally care if it takes a little longer than not, so that be the case. Just give us the opportunity if we want to ask these questions. That's all I'm asking of you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Granger, we are moving on now to page 67. Are there any issues to raise there? None. Page 68. Public Transport Implementation Plan, which we've covered already earlier, which is coming up on September the 10th. Councillor Robson. Okay. 69.
Yes.
Councillor Curraq. Councillor Granger, yes, you'll get preference. Councillor Granger.
It's just in regards to the Hyrene Causeway Turret Road. A couple of things there I do want to mention. As regards to the pile capacity investigations, I understood that was done months ago. It's just since completed here. The other thing I do want to ask is regards to the possible three laning and of course the tidal flow. I think there's a matter of urgency. Can I just have some response of some sort on that?
We had reported back previously. We provided you with the technical reports around that and the issues associated with that. So, and then we said we needed to do further work around what other options would be available. And there's also the consideration as part of the Urban Form and Transport Initiative about what the role and function of that corridor is. So we can bring you back that previous work if you wanted more on that.
So, well, I personally would like that, and I'm sure the other councillors would as well. It's just that I feel that, you know, it has been dragging on a long time, you know that, and I don't want it to drag on any further. So if we can, you know, address it ASAP, the better.
So the previous report that we brought to you showed you the complexities of all of the issues that were associated with that, and that it made some sense to look back at the bigger picture, given the level of investment. And at that time, the council seemed comfortable with that. But if you want to ask for it to come back, we're effectively just bringing the same material back to you, because there's no more work being done on that tidal flow yet, and we haven't done any further traffic analysis. So the model is up and running, but this will need to be put through the model, and part of that is understanding what assumptions we're going to put in terms of residential intensification, etc., which would come out of the UFTI project. So those two projects need to be working together.
Okay.
Email back the report, and if you then wanted to have some further work or further conversation about that, happy to do that.
Councillor Curraq next, then
because I'm sure during
Robson
the
Stewart.
election campaign, Christine, that will be really pressured to actually deliver something there. So it would be helpful to get, you know, to be kept up to date. And in terms of the Turret Road matter and the complexities that you referred to, one of those is the resource consent. And you may recall a couple of times I've raised the issue with even the tidal flow and an issue with resource consent, because the gantries require an extreme cutback of the Puhura Kawas. And I mentioned an investigation into whether two gantries, one on 15th and one at the, before the Tyrene Bridge, could achieve the safety requirements when it's in conjunction with LEDs, and therefore, overcoming the requirement for gantries along turret. Have you sort of thought of that and made any inquiries in terms of NZTA? I'm not sure, because NZTA have got experience up in Whangapura. They might be able to sort of answer that question fairly quickly, but it's just around safety, obviously.
Understanding that the consultants that were working that looked at what was happening with the NZTA up north and took on some of that experience, but we can re-ask the question if you'd like that re-asked.
Councillor Robson, then Stewart.
Happy to move when ready, Chair.
The Stewart next.
Thank you. Just like with Bay Park, I just feel that the tidal flow would be helpful, and anything we can do to do a 3-lane trial, I believe, would be worthwhile. So other than the resource consent, is there any other major impediment why we can't trial it?
I think there were some issues as well in terms of the approaches, but I'd have to go back and read the report. Sorry, I don't have it in my head.
73? I've been cheeky to try and bring up that issue of the bus lane, if I could, Mr. Chairman. But it's a later page by page.
I'll just stay on page 69 for now. It would be useful, I think, if we had a report at some point from staff. We seem to be leaping to, let's have a trial of 3-laning it. There must be significant amount of work needed on that bridge to actually make it work to start with. No, it can hold the weight and so on, but there's still work to be done on there to make it wide for 3 lanes. So that's, you've got to take cycle lanes off, you've got to, and I think thinking about a short-term quick trial is not very realistic given what's got to be done. And if you think about that construction work occurring on that bridge, you might find some very unhappy people for a while that goes on in order to find the solution. So could we have some report at some point just how much construction time might be involved in actually making that suitable for a trial of a tidal flow 3-lane arrangement?
We could do that. In my recollection, I have to go back, but the report that was done looked at the consenting requirements. So one is you have to remove the cycle bridge, you have to put that somewhere else, but also the approaches were had implications in terms of the marine area, and that was quite a significant issue in terms of resource consent. So I'll go back and I will recirculate to elected members the information that you've been provided, which was around what do you physically need, what do you need in terms of consenting to be able to physically do the tidal flow, both in terms of the gantry signage, but also physically on the corridor to give adequate width for vehicles. And that's a consenting approval requirement. And then there was also, then we can also look at the physical construction that's associated with that.
Mayor Brownless?
Yep, I just think if we can get the bridge right, and that obviously might need an alternative for cyclists and pedestrians, which might need another narrow bridge, and I realise there'll be resource consents for that. I wouldn't get too worried about the toll gantries in the meantime, because for 3 or 4 years, very successfully, Ngatai Road, Chapel Street ran with a system where a truck went out and put some cones, and then it took them in, and that worked until obviously the route went over the top of it. So, but I do agree there is an issue with that bridge. If we can get that solved, then I think it would be worth some sort of a use of a cone system to see how it all goes. But anyway, that's just some random thoughts.
Yes, so that concludes page 69. And pages 71, 72, 73, 74 have been dealt with already. And any further queries on that can be emailed in for response. I have a mover for the motion, Councillor Robson. Do I have a seconder? I shall, yes, Councillor Clout, speaking to the motion. Councillor Robson.
But just for a point of clarification to the chair, the speaking time for removal of a motion is how long? Thank you. Thank you, please do. Speaking to the motion, I'd like to thank the staff for this report, and I'm happy to move the recommended motion. However, a couple of things have, how could I put it, concerned me. One is we've got material in this report delivered to us effectively by staff that they've been unable to speak to. Now, I appreciate that our staff have an enormous workload, but if we have material delivered to us by staff in a report, be in an appendix, whatever the source, we do need them to be able to speak to questions from elected members, ideally. Now, I think the issue is actually, and please don't interpret this as a criticism of staff. I understand from comments the Chief Executive has made quite publicly that we don't have the sort of transport function, capacity and capability that a council of our size needs. That being said, the issue of transport for our community is massive, absolutely massive. So I suppose looking at the time that we've allocated this compared to the size of the level of interest in our community, looking at the allocation of resource internally in relation to the problems we have in our transport function, I think the report, the tone of the conversation and some of the issues raised means we may need to think again about how we address these issues. And I suppose consequent to that is it reminds me that next triennium some consideration should be given to perhaps doubling the number of UFTID meetings, giving one the urban form focus and another one a transport focus, without going back to the old transport committee meetings. But we seem to have been under some time pressure here, and I appreciate that, but that's not conducive to good thinking, good discussion, good debate, and particularly good decision making. I'm concerned that we're not addressing these topics, and the frustration is leading us to push for things that the chair himself has observed. You know, let's trial it, let's do something. There is a pressure to do things here, and if we can at least get a chance to consider these issues in an environment where we're fully informed, where staff have had time to get their heads around what it is they're putting in front of us, I think that would be conducive to better decisions, maybe lower the frustration in the room, which I've seen, and maybe make sounder progress going forward. So while I appreciate the work that's in there and the information, there are a lot of questions almost under every section. Now, there's been some degree of constraint exercised by various elected members, not asking too much, but it's tough, and it puts the chair in a difficult situation as well to have to manage that process. It's a process of, it's an issue of our own making, because we are not resourcing this particular area of our community's concern, I believe, as well as we should, either in terms of governance time or in terms of organisational resource. So happy to move the recommended motion, but I do believe we need to have a conversation about how we get this right. And rushed meetings between two other meetings on a list of issues that are of major import to our community, I don't think is the right way to go, and it makes it tough on everyone, particularly the chair, because the chair becomes the brunt of everyone's frustrations, and that's unfair. The staff working under pressure, we know we're trying to build a function, but we know we haven't got it yet. We understand from senior staff that recruitment to support the resourcing issues we have is proving extraordinarily difficult. Maybe we need to open up the issues we have to our community so that they get some understanding, so and some appreciation. At the moment, over the last couple of weeks, I've seen a number of conversations in our community which reflect, I suppose, the sort of frustration that's seen in this chamber. So thank you for the indulgence, because and thank you for the indulgence of my colleagues. I clearly have some of their support, because some of them could have probably hit me with a point of order with regard to topic, but none of them did. And thank you for the indulgence of the chair. It's a serious point that I'm making here. This is a massive issue. It needs proper resourcing in terms of governance, time, quality information, and staff to do the job. At the moment, we're all, I think, under the pump on this, and I'd like to see us take some steps, or if not, leave a note in at the end of this triennium for the incoming people. Hey, transport, it's topic number one, and you need to resource it. Thank you.
Thank you. A seconder. Any other speakers? Councillor Stewart.
I would like to take 10 seconds to endorse Councillor Robson's comments. I think they were very much to the point and certainly express my concerns as a councillor.
At the risk, any other speakers? At the risk of starting a right of reply off from the mover, the motion before us is receive the Transport Planning Project's Progress Report, August 2019. There are no decisions being made at this committee. It is a report. I would recommend we start to alter our culture. Those of us who may be able to return here, we will have to wait and see. But we have too much slipped into a culture where we think we can ask all our questions when we come here to committees instead of beforehand. We have these reports days ahead of time. If you could ask questions by email of staff, you may get staff prepared to answer them at this meeting. The things that are on the agenda today and those attachments were supplied by the Regional Council. So it's a bit of a tall ask to ask them to respond to all those questions. But we need to get more efficient in the way we operate, in my humble opinion, colleagues, whereby we are not holding people up in this chamber who have jobs to do because we haven't asked questions ahead of time and done a bit of thinking before the meeting. That is my comment to this. If it was a decision to be made, I would have given more opportunity for you to explore these things because it's important you have that time. But when it is simply a report that you can easily ask questions about beforehand, I don't believe we need to go on forever with questions. So you may disagree with that, and I respect your opinions on it. The right of reply will come to Councillor Robson now, because Councillor Stewart has already spoken.
Yeah. And I think I have 5 minutes for a right of reply, Chair, if I remember right, something like yeah, look, there is a balance to be struck here, and some of the points the Chair makes are valid. But we received today, 3 separate agendas, all of them with significant issues, all of them requiring us to read, comprehend, discuss with colleagues to see whether we understood them correctly, to talk to third parties that we may or may not have relationships with. And of course, we receive these normally at the end of a working week. Saturday and Sunday, you know, we're really quite good at backing off the staff on the weekend. I think the balance is wrong. I think occasionally we're in that situation. But when we're receiving information, is the time to be asking questions? You know, it's the decision-making thing. If you haven't done your thinking and got your questions before, more time for the debate actually isn't helpful. It's about, you know, what did someone say? You know, getting the information first before you ask the questions. It's the right way of doing it. Doing it the other way around is not good. We know that we are resource short. We know we don't have the capacity and capability that we need inside this organisation. Our chief executive has brought a refreshing level of honesty to some of these things. Not necessarily, I think, that he's been rewarded for it, but the honesty of recognising that we don't have the resourcing we need, that we don't have the capacity and capability we need. One of the things we need to do is to invest at least more governance time in understanding things so we can be more focused. In the conversations in here, if we can refine our understanding and walk away with some clarity, there's less chance of us making a decision which will impose not just a burden on the staff, but a significant financial burden on the ratepayers. I would say that there has been a series of projects that were initiated at the beginning of this triennium for various reasons, which have turned out to create significant financial impost on the ratepayers of the city. And I would say most of them, if you go back to the root source, and Durham Street would be an obvious one, the report back from staff was they weren't given the time necessary to do the planning necessary, to do the job necessary to deliver the outcome the community wanted. Assuming, of course, the community did want it, the original consultation was valid. The point that I'm making is the time spent pre-initiative, pre-project is really important. Project initiation, I believe, is an area where we fail repeatedly. And not just us. I mean, you know, we're currently getting slammed on social media about the B2B fiasco. As in, you know, one particular site which wants 11 of us to go is currently talking about the disaster that is B2B, another council failure, because not recognising it as NZTA all across this. And I note again that there are some topics that we haven't picked up with regard to meetings with NZTA, and none of us mentioned the underpass and the conversation around these projects, probably because we're tired of talking to a brick wall. But the issue comes back to, we need the time and quality information to have discussions, to be informed for when it comes to making decisions. And that's all I'm asking for. The points you make are occasionally valid, but three meetings in one day across a range of topics, a weekend between getting the agendas and the all-day meeting, a significant workload yesterday in terms of addressing smart growth for Wednesday. You know, we need to understand the capacity and capability of the councillors. Thank you for the invitation to reply.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? That's carried. Before closing the meeting, I will allow the Chief Executive to give a response to those
Thank you,
things
Mr. Chair. I feel I do need to pass a comment in response to the current situation and the remaining time that we have left in these chambers. It seems that there has been a desire expressed by this council to move business along in the normal process. It does appear that things are slowing down in terms of that process, and I think that perhaps our schedule between now and the end of this triennium is over ambitious. On that basis, I'm quite happy to review what is planned between now and the time this council finishes and report back, perhaps at the next opportunity for some decisions to be made about what is or isn't on our agenda.
With that, I will close the Urban Form and Transport Development Committee, and the chair will be occupied now by the Chair of Policy. Is he going to give us a short break before he starts, or do you want to assume? 2-minute break? 4 items.